Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all in our Freedom School Hollywood Squares. Welcome to Freedom School. This is our first event of the year. And it's a Freedom School after we had such an eventful year last year. And of course, in the Northeast, we've had such an eventful 2 days. So thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see you. So my name is Donna Murch, and I'm the chapter president of the I'm the chapter president of New Brunswick, and also the co-chair of the media committee. And welcome. It's wonderful to see everyone. Tonight, we're going to be talking about something very, very exciting, which as the title of the program, Seizing the Moment, Budget Reconciliation in Higher Education Now. So we're going to be talking about a new higher education coalition that has been created. And it's been created at a time that is in some ways, at least in my lifetime, unprecedented. A discussion about the expansion of the role of government, the budget reconciliation process, and a debate really about what it means to build the infrastructure of the country, not only its physical infrastructure, but its human infrastructure, its educational infrastructure, and other forms of important social programming. So it's really the reason we're having a Freedom School also so early. It's the first week of school at Rutgers, but because we're looking to the budget reconciliation process, the timing was important. Before we get started, I wanted to let people know that Freedom School will be broadcast through YouTube. And we have a YouTube channel called Rutgers Freedom School. It is really a kind of public archive of all the different activism of our union, and also for Scholars for New Deal for Higher Education. We also have programming from them. So we encourage you to subscribe to the channel, and it's organized into playlists. So if you're interested in some aspect of organizing, you can go and look. Many thanks to the grad student leaders who played such a crucial role in getting our YouTube channel up and running. So I'll start with a little bit of framing to think about the moment that we're in at Rutgers and nationally. Last year was a whirlwind year. So many things happened. Just as I was trying to put together these remarks, I just found myself leaving whole things out. I think it's been like that for everyone. The devastating effects of the pandemic, the economic crisis that it engendered, the fact that 700,000 higher education workers lost their job. At Rutgers, 5% of our workforce was laid off. And in response to that, a coalition of Rutgers unions that entails 19 unions and 20,000 workers was formed. And if I could think about kind of the scope of last year, it was really a time of thinking about solidarity, not just as an idea, but as a process that was built through bringing together different groups of workers and really thinking about how we feel solidarity for one another and how we put that into practice. And I think out of this kind of crisis moment, it also paved the way, not only at Rutgers, but schools across the country, for thinking about what a people-centered vision of higher education is, pushing back against the corporatized neoliberal vision of universities, which was commodified education, limited to the few, increasingly inaccessible for students, while paying huge sectors of its workforce meager wages, denying them the right to a living wage and a secure future. So it's in that context that we can think about the programming tonight that in many ways grows out of this very complex moment that we're in, made all the more urgent by the climate crisis, which we are all experiencing. It's my pleasure to introduce my co-host today, Professor Todd Wolfson. He is an anthropologist in the Department of Media Studies. He is a longtime community and labor organizer who's done so many different types of foundational work in Philadelphia and other cities, including the co-founding of the Media Mobilizing Project. We in the union also know him as our former president, our most immediate former president, and also as our current vice president. Todd is very modest, but he played a foundational role in the coalition of Rutgers unions and really did just an amazing job bringing together all these different job classifications, thinking about how they relate to each other, and trying to create a union which represents all 100,000 of the people at Rutgers. So it's my pleasure to introduce him and also to thank him for all the work that he's done, both at Rutgers and in creating the Higher Education Labor United.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Donna. I really appreciate it. And all right. And I also wanted to say that it's just so exciting that we get to finally sort of announce Donna as the new president of the New Brunswick chapter of Rutgers AAUP-AFT, and Andy Urban, who is going to be the new vice president of the chapter. We are so lucky and excited about the work that you're going to undertake, Donna, that Andy's going to undertake in building up a really strong chapter. I would be remiss not to say that our previous president of the chapter, Carla Katz, also did fantastic work, as did Will Bruscher, who is the vice president, and Carla has now become the vice president of NTT faculty. So they did amazing work, and they've passed the baton off to an amazing team that are going to do some more amazing work. And Donna, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the next New Brunswick chapter meeting is October 1st, yeah, in the afternoon. So if you're New Brunswick grad, faculty, counselor, please look out for that event and come out and support, because we are coming into a contract campaign, and the only way that we're going to get what we need is by building the strongest union possible, and that starts with our chapters, and it starts with organizing. So please join us for the next New Brunswick chapter meeting, and congratulations, Donna. We're so lucky to have you. I think for my part tonight, first off, I want to say that we have some amazing folks speaking who have been leaders in building out what is now called Higher Ed Labor United. And so we're so lucky, and we're going to get to hear from them. And what I wanted to do is I'm going to get together with Ian, and we're going to sort of set the stage for what Higher Ed Labor United is and why it is. So I'm going to talk about the context, and then Ian's going to jump in, and I'll introduce him, and he'll say a little bit more about the what, why, and how of it. And then we have some amazing speakers, both from Rutgers and from the national movement, that will offer their perspective on that after Ian and I speak. So what I wanted to do was lay out the why of Higher Ed Labor United, why we've built this thing. Ian will say more about what it is, but I do think it's important to note that it's about 70 unions representing about 400,000 workers across the country in 30 to 40 states and all classes of workers. And we started organizing this a scant 4 or 5 months ago. So it's really grown and blossomed in just the 4 months. And I'm sorry, I have to say that Rosie is here, and that's my daughter. She's singing, and she will be singing throughout the time I speak. So I apologize for that. But I can't stop her from singing. That would be impossible. So I guess what I want to talk about is why it's important that we build this coalition of labor unions across the country to kind of express our political will. And I think it's important, and Donna sort of touched on this, but I just want to give it a little more detail. I think there's a real context to why we decided to focus on, and Rutgers has played an important role, but many of the people who speak tonight also played an important role. But maybe to talk about why Rutgers has put a lot of energy, Rutgers AAUP-AFT has put a lot of energy into building this. And so I think there's a couple of really critical things. One is the long-term crisis of public higher education. And we all know this, but it's important to mark it, that over the last 40 to 50 years, there has been a consistent disinvestment of public higher education. From federal government and from our state governments, New Jersey being one of the states that's disinvested the most in its public higher education. It's almost over, sweetheart. So the first is all right, I have to say, everyone has to say hi to Levi. Hi, Levi, say hi.
Hi, Levi.
Let me just finish talking, and then I'll come and help you, okay?
Okay, it's not dinner time over.
Dinner time is over, yes. Okay, so the first is, why is this disinvestment? And so we all know about this disinvestment at the federal and state level, but it's had serious impacts, and we all know the impacts. One is that university managers have, because they've gotten less support, have driven us towards neoliberal strategies of the university. So the neoliberal university, the corporate university that we all live under, is a university that's a direct outgrowth of the disinvestment at the federal and state level. And it's led to very serious outcomes. One is skyrocketing tuition costs at Rutgers. Every year over the last 20 years, tuition has been raised, except for 1 year in the middle of the pandemic. Every other year we have raised tuition on our students. That is killing our undergrads. And it also is leading to piles of student debt that are crippling both our graduates and are crippling our economy. So one part of this disinvestment has been tuition, but there's also been increasing focus on precarious, low-wage labor, whether it's instructional labor for our adjuncts who do amazing work but are not paid what they should be paid and do not have the kind of security they deserve, or whether it's our staff. So the corporate university managers have turned to and created more and more precarious work. So we all know this, that there's been this long-term disinvestment. We also know that it's led to an outgrowth of these deans and associate vice presidents of this crap and that crap doing all sorts of stuff. But alongside that, it's cut back on the governance of the university from faculty, staff, and students, and led to governance of the university by lawyers and bureaucrats. And so that's the long-term crisis that we're in. And then we also got hit with a short-term crisis. The pandemic, as Donna marked, has hit the university across the country very hard. Public universities have lost, higher ed in general has lost 700,000 jobs, 13% of the sector. And at Rutgers, we've seen it, right? 1,000 people laid off, largely our staff and our adjunct faculty, and disproportionately women and people of color who have been stripped of healthcare in the middle of a pandemic, right? So these are two critical contextual factors. One is the long-term crisis and the other is the pandemic or the short-term crisis. But then there's one other factor that led us to sort of start to think about building this thing, which is that there is no aligned voice that brings together workers and students at the national level to fight over the future of higher ed. And there are big national unions that do some work around this, but most of those national unions have a base of workers in another sector that's bigger, whether it's our parent union, AFT, or whether it's CWA or SCIU or UAW or AFSCME. And because of that, there has not been a movement of higher ed labor to fight over the future of higher ed at the federal level and to build a movement. And so we saw that. And so we saw these crises and we saw a lack of alignment and leadership. And finally, we saw a president, for better or worse, and we could say a lot about the president. I'm not really interested in going there, but what we do know about the president is that he and the Democrats are flushing a lot of money into the economy to respond to the economic impacts of the pandemic. And one of the places that flushing money is higher ed. And so given all those things, the fact that they're putting money into higher ed, the fact that there isn't enough alignment and leadership, and the fact that we are living through these crises at the long and short term, we knew we had to build something that brought together labor across the nation and across all job categories in higher ed. We're talking about faculty, both full-time, part-time, and non-tenure stream. We're talking about grad workers, postdocs, staff, administrative staff, dining, facilities, healthcare. All of us need to get together across the nation and make our demands understood so that we can come together and reimagine the future of higher ed. So that's the context for why we started to do this work and to build this national coalition, which is now named Higher Ed Labor United. And that's what we want to talk about tonight. The only way we're going to win the things we want to win is if we build this national coalition and then we understand what it's doing on our campuses, do the sort of political education we need to do so that when we need to do direct actions, Rutgers is ready to stand up and stand shoulder to shoulder with the other universities and make demands. So that's where we're at. That's what we want to talk about tonight. But I'm going to kick it to Ian Gavigan to say a little bit more about what Higher Ed Labor United is. But before I do that, I need to say this. Ian Gavigan is a grad worker at Rutgers. He is a historian, a fantastic historian. I'm super excited to read his work on the history of movements in the US. But Ian is also an organizer extraordinaire, and much of the idea of HELU came out of his beautiful brain. And so I'm going to introduce Ian to say a little bit more about what HELU is, and then we'll get to our national and local speakers. Ian, jump in, please.
Thank you for those very kind words, Todd, and that really fantastic framing. Thank you, Donna, as well, and thank you for all of our great panelists who are here tonight. I think this is an extremely important conversation to introduce our members and each other to this long-term project. So as Todd said, currently HELU is made up of more than 75 unions, well over 400,000 workers, actually closer to maybe even above 440,000. Trent, I know you're in the audience, you could pop that in the chat. And we're organizing across almost a dozen internationals. We have we're reaching towards and we're building at a really big, broad, diverse scale. And that is critical to the long, medium, and short-term goals that HELU has of connecting campus-based and system-based activism and organizing and fights to the national crises in our, frankly, national labor markets that are broken at the national level and that require solutions far beyond what can be provided at the campus scale. So with that, I'm going to go through what those goals are. So the long-term vision that HELU began with, and that I think it continues to and will continue to embody, is to build a big, bold, diverse movement of everyone who works in, attends, relies on, or lives alongside the higher education system in this country to reconstruct and democratize the colleges and universities and academic medical systems and the sprawling kind of greater academic economy as a public good in the public interest, one that works for students, workers, and communities. So that's a vision. That's not that's not an endpoint. But in terms of our medium-term goals, what we think we're fighting towards in a year and 2 years is to get really concrete about ending the labor crises that so many face. I'm a graduate student. I'm extremely worried about the fact that there are like next to no job listings in the field that I work in, which is a big field. And I know that is an experience that many, many thousands of people have all over this country all the time. And the instructional job crisis isn't the only job crisis in higher education. As we saw at Rutgers, layoffs, outsourcing, downsizing impacts workers across the spectrum, but with a disproportionate impact among service workers, workers of color, that we saw in our own COVID crisis at Rutgers. Another medium-term goal to fight around is around the debt crises, not only the debt crisis of students, but also the debt crises that institutions hold. The debt and the demands of debt of creditors have so much to do with the anti-labor, anti-worker, anti-people policies that administrations unveil all the time. And broadly speaking, I think our medium-term goal is to politicize the struggles around the labor crises on our campuses and across the country, and politicize the debt struggles that students and institutions face as not just questions of the individual decisions of individual administrators, but politicize them as national political questions that require national coordinated action and national coordinated solutions. And so our short-term goals that we're working on right now, and the reason we rushed to get this event together for Rutgers, AAUP-AFT, and partner members, is that we have actually really short-term goals, which is to engage and shape the budget reconciliation process to make progress on ending the adjunctification of instruction through attaching real substantive requirements to new federal education funding to require the math conversion of adjunctified workers' positions into full-time work, for example. Another budget reconciliation goal is around getting four-year institutions included in the budget reconciliation bill. We know that President Biden has proposed a community college only solution to college affordability, and the problem is that just isn't enough. And we need to get four-year institutions included in there. We need to get the kind of higher education program at the national level really focused on the entirety of the system, not just on the 17% community colleges. And then the third plank is around pay parity for those requiring at the federal level that institutions receiving money establish pay parity and living wages for those who remain adjunct instructors and for all the non-instructional staff. So we have a 75% tenure track floor with a conversion process for adjuncts into tenure track jobs with a redefinition of tenure to make sure it can apply to people who have spent their careers teaching. We have an expansion of the college provisions of budget reconciliation to four-year institutions. And so that we're not having community colleges pitted against four-year institutions, and getting pay parity and living wages for staff and adjunct instruction across the board. So do we think we're going to win every single one of those things? No, but these are the things, these are the immediate goals that we believe it is possible to fight for and potentially win on, but we don't see those as the medium or long-term goals. And the tactics we're using are coordinating collective action across unions and higher education institutions and leveraging our collective actions and our collective pressure into political power. So that was a lot. I hope it wasn't too much, but I'm gonna end my comments there and turn it back over to our hosts, Donna and Todd, to lead us through our speakers.
Thank you so much, Ian. I wanted to mention something that happened last year, which I think is a really important precedent. I think one of the big challenges is that many people have become pessimistic and fatalistic about the nature of the contemporary university. And one very exciting thing that happened at Grad of the Coalition of Rutgers Unions is that with the help of the executive director, Patrick Nolan, and other people that are on this call today, a legislative committee was created that worked with the 19 unions at Rutgers covering 20,000 people, and we successfully lobbied to have the restoration of our state funding during the pandemic. So we actually do have a win under our belt, which helps create inertia for national organizing.
Excellent. So I think now what we want to do, we want to have time to get into back and forth, hear folks' questions. But I think we also want to have a chance to hear from some national leaders, and we're really lucky to have them, and then some local leaders or people who want to take part in this work. So I think with that, we're going to hear from speakers. If you can bear with us a little longer and hear a couple more wonderful presentations, we'll pivot from there into discussion. I would also be remiss before I go into those leaders if I didn't say that the other union that really helped win the restoration of the budget was Union of Rutgers Administrators, URA. They did amazing work alongside us to win that back. So with that, I'm going to kick it to our first speaker tonight. We're so lucky to have Colena Sesanker. Colena is a faculty member in philosophy at Gateway Community College, and she is the political director of the 4Cs Union, which represents about 4,000 higher ed workers in Connecticut, and has been one of the leaders in thinking about the relationship between four-year institutions and two-year institutions. And in fact, someone just linked to Ian linked to an amazing op-ed that Colena has in the New York Times about that very question. So with that, I'll kick it to you, Colena.
Thanks, Todd, and hi all. Thank you for having me. I love Rutgers Freedom School, so it's so wonderful to be here with you all. And let me just sort of introduce where I'm coming from, the perspective, right? So I'm speaking as a recently tenured associate professor of philosophy at Gateway Community College. I also serve on the board of regents for the 17 colleges and universities, public colleges and universities in Connecticut, which have for a long time been working on establishing closer and closer relationships so that that transfer is more possible. And I'm also someone who, before I found a full-time position, cobbled together a living teaching at, part-time at a number of institutions, both public and private. And I sought out a position at a public institution and community college specifically. It is a love of mine. So you might wonder why someone like me with a permanent position at a community college is so involved in pursuing the particular aims of HULU, especially when it does seem as if we could just kind of ride the momentum that's going right now, sit back, wait for Biden to fund community colleges, and we'll thrive. And finally, the thing that I always thought would happen, which was that a wide range of folks from all kinds of backgrounds would use the community colleges as a launching point for the first few years of their college experience. That would be in a perfect world, but we're not in a perfect world. And we know that across the country, we have been suffering there's increasing defunding at the state level of our institutions over the past few decades. And I think I would say even in Connecticut, I think we passed the point of no return, right? We have gone so far that it's not clear that we can have a surviving system at the levels of funding that we actually have. And we're not as bad as some places, since the Great Recession, the amount of the reduction that they have sustained. So that decrease in funding has created a situation where we're increasing our reliance on debt service, which increases our focus on building administration, on prioritizing debt service, and on increasing precarity of the workforce, right? The workforce, which is the point of contact between our institutions and our students, the people who actually serve our students day to day and have a feel for what the students want, are more and more marginalized every year, it seems. And a lot of us can see this even with the COVID funding that we got recently. You would think that would provide a cushion to make it possible to prioritize safety in returning to campus over enrollment. And yet what we see, or at least what I have seen, is that the portions of the funding that are tied, they're specifically only for students, have been used in really inspiring ways, but the institutional portions have gone in other directions, right? And further, actually, it just getting us further down the road of this sort of destruction that most of us are experiencing in higher ed. So, I want to say that given that sort of context, given the fact that, the way that we are set up now, funding would just speed up the trajectory that we're on if it is not tied to conditions, and specifically, I think, labor provisions, right? I worry that if our funding is not attached to labor provisions that we're advancing, that flips that balance so that instead of the majority of our instruction coming from folks who are increasingly precarious, they don't know from one year to the next whether they'll still be employed, that we emphasize permanent full-time positions. And that is for both faculty and staff, for all of us. These are about high quality jobs for all of us, right? I also worry that corporations are primed to leverage any infusion of federal funding that our colleges receive, right? And we already emphasize workforce training tracks over academic tracks in terms of what we market and what we present to students. And, I don't want us to be pushed further down in the direction that taxpayer dollars and tuition dollars serve to subsidize the immediate workforce needs of the corporations in the area, as opposed to the lifelong needs of our communities, right? We know that students of color are overrepresented at our colleges and underrepresented at our universities in our system, right? And we also know that in the last 40 years, incomes have really soared for those with advanced degrees, 4 years or more, and declined for those with less than 4-year degrees. We know that at our community colleges, the percent of students who qualify for Pell Grants is roughly double that of the percent that qualify at the universities. So what we need is sort of both. right? We need to preserve our colleges as a place where all the different paths are sustained, right? There is something very wrong with the gap between the incomes of those with advanced degrees and those without, right? There's something very wrong with the undervaluing of so many categories of labor. And that is the reason, and I'll let other folks speak to this, that our platform is broader, right? It's about everyone who works in higher education and that sort of pay parity, et cetera. But in the meantime, we have to reckon with where we are. And in the current economic context, providing financial support that drops off before higher levels or directs folks who need it to one path rather than another is likely to lead to the exacerbation of existing class divisions and race divisions, right? So while our, less conventional non-four-year paths are excellent, and it's wonderful that we are providing them, we have to make sure that all paths are available to all students. And the issue here is the emphasis on workforce needs while sidelining the long-term life needs of our students. In our system, we have just eliminated developmental education that makes possible college level work for folks who come from all different kinds of neighborhoods, right? Now, it hasn't been eliminated yet at the universities. We already see a difference in the expectations for college and university students. So we want to keep that partnership as tight as possible, right? You couple, that elimination with an emphasis on graduation rates and the heavy marketing of some paths rather than others, and you have to ask ourselves, are we steering community colleges or community college students towards a distinct path, a path that is different from others? And are we putting them in a place where those who want an advanced degree are going towards a dead end, right? So it's an imperfect world. We have to work with what we have, and we need to all work together to make sure that all paths are available to everyone in our world funding without labor conditions and in a way that splinters community colleges from their central place within higher ed is a potential recipe for ghettoizing the community colleges. And we need funding and oversight that ensures our function as a public good, right? So working in coalition with four-year schools is a recipe to make sure that we retain bridges to advanced degrees for those who choose that path. Because look, the precarity of our working conditions is the erosion of our students' learning conditions. And I know most of us have entered this line of work with the intention of providing something that has long been a common good and is very much at risk right now. So this is about students and our future as a country, not about capturing market share as community colleges. And our over-reliance on enrollments and tuition is a function of the very conditions that created this sustained crisis. So that's where I'm coming from in terms of, sort of community college folks thinking about why this broader view is so important. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Colena. That was amazing. And I really do encourage people to read Colena's op-ed in the New York Times. It was incredible. And it did so much work for making this case for why we need a new deal for higher education. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who's both a union colleague and comrade, Bryan Sachs, who is a part-time lecturer in Camden and is the vice president of the Part-Time Lecturers Faculty Union. Bryan?
Thanks, Donna. Can you hear me okay? Great. It's great to be here, everybody. It's wonderful to have the chance to just say a few words about what you've heard already from Todd and Colena, and I'll hear from others about the crisis in higher ed that's been exacerbated by the pandemic, and particularly how it's impacted adjuncts in our union at Rutgers, and a bit about how it's impacted adjuncts across the country. And that explains, well, I'll go a long way to explaining why the Higher Ed Labor United vision we're sharing here tonight is important to winning the changes we need to end precarity at the university level, or certainly to seriously reduce it. Many here will remember that when the pandemic hit in spring 2020, adjuncts were the first employees at Rutgers to lose their work. We were cut by 20% across the board, in fact, due to a punitive hiring freeze. We saw promised appointments for fall 2020 taken away, despite the fact that the feared decline in enrollments never really materialized. And many of the adjuncts who lost their jobs had just worked over spring break to convert their courses for remote delivery, and they had done it for no additional pay. And so the cuts were just all the more painful and unfair for that reason. Those of us who remained and got to teach in fall 2020 were often sped up. We saw our course caps raised, and they were raised to levels that research shows doesn't serve students or instructors well in online learning environments. Nationally, adjuncts suffered losses that were less pronounced than those at Rutgers, but also in line with losses other vulnerable academic workers suffered. There was a Washington Post report last fall that noted the lowest paid workers in higher education were bearing the brunt of the layoffs. That mirrored broader national trends, the report said. There's another report from the College and University Professional Association for Human Resources that noted that in 2021, adjunct faculty had experienced the greatest decrease in size by faculty group, I think a 5% reduction in our workforce. And even that doesn't really capture it all. It can be difficult to come up with accurate numbers to represent adjunct losses, since we also tend to lose work in less overt or decisive ways than just getting a pink slip. We might still be teaching, but we see our course loads reduced for a term or for two, and that directly reduces our income. So it's harder to get a true feel for our true losses, but I don't think anybody doubts that the pandemic has made our already precarious situation worse. And so things aren't good. But that's partly why we're here tonight, to discuss why it's important not only to hold the line against further cuts, but to reimagine the academic labor landscape in a way that ensures that all academic workers are treated justly, which ties the improvement of our working conditions to the financial and educational needs of students. And that linkage, I think, is one of the things, if not the main thing, that makes our short-term goals really unique and vital. And so you've heard those short-term goals from Ian. I wanted to use the rest of my time, if I could, to deliver a quick personal reflection, if I could, on the situation in higher ed as it pertains to adjuncts. Todd already touched on it in his opening remarks. Colena said a bit as well. And also to deliver, if I could, a mild provocation. And I was thinking about this, and to put it as starkly as I can, both before the pandemic, but even more so during it, I think the administration here at Rutgers, and also administrations elsewhere, seem to have made a kind of bet. They've bet that they can cut resources for departments and deny adjuncts basic support for their jobs, while not having that disinvestment be made visible to the students we teach. They've bet that the professionalism of adjuncts and our long-established willingness to overperform in order to give students everything they need, even as we're being denied what we need, will continue. And honestly, it's a pretty good bet. You know, they've cashed that bet for a long time. The administration's bet that even without offices to meet students, or timely delivery of our contracts, or reasonable course caps to assure course quality and fair working conditions, or pay for the course conversion work we do and all the other extra tasks we complete, that even without all this stuff, adjuncts will still get the job done, because we do. But we're also near the breaking point. A lot of us are broken already, to be honest. We're not around any longer teaching. And that's why we need, and we're so gratified to have the support of fellow faculty and staff in coalition. We need that coalition. We need Higher Ed Labor United. We need its platform to become a reality, including, most importantly, the provisions that offer us real job security. And I can tell you that the executive board of my union feels lucky to have full-time faculty leaders like Donna, like Todd, like Becky Gibbon to work with, leaders who have a national profile and who have so successfully articulated a vision of cross-category intersectional unionism that I think Higher Ed Labor United in part realizes. I think most of us accept that a formation like this is needed in order to end the precarity academic workers face in time. And for all the justified concern that adjuncts have about being left behind when this current conjuncture resolves, we think in our unit that we have reason to believe we're positioned as well as we ever have been to make some of the gains we richly deserve. we hope it comes quickly through the current legislative process. But as Ian said, we don't have any illusions about this. We're hopeful in this moment, but we don't have illusions. And we only feel as hopeful as we do, I would say, because we're gaining in confidence that our alliance with faculty and staff unions here at Rutgers and around the country will transcend the political moment. It's not just short term, it's for that immediate term, for that long term. So all of this is just a short way to offer our gratitude to those leaders who have prioritized our needs, made room for our voices within coalition spaces, and also to ask them to please stay vigilant against the forces of compromise that are sure to encroach on this process, including those that might come from our parent unions, if and when our core demands get taken seriously by federal policymakers. And so in closing, I just want to say how nice it is to be among these speakers, these presenters, people who are so concerned about the situation facing academic laborers and adjuncts, and just how extremely grateful I am for the efforts of Ian and for the others who have given so much of their recent lives to working to make this effort a reality. Thanks everybody for listening, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Bryan. I just wanted to underscore the many, many important points that Bryan made, and to think about, there's a lot of discussion right now about, for the first time, we have a national show representing the professoriate. So people are all having these debates in social media about the chair and White Lotus. But one of the things that's so striking to me about this is the lack of recognition that 80% of the professoriate are contingent workers. And so, the fight against contingency is core to what our larger fight is. And that ongoing process of making both non-tenure track full-time faculty and part-time lecturers and adjuncts invisible is one of the core things that HELU is trying to fight. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is also one of Rutgers' own, Alex Adams, who is a grad worker in biological sciences at Newark and is our first vice president of graduate workers. Alex?
Thank you so much for the intro, Donna. I'm going to be really brief, particularly because I think Ian set me up really well for what I want to say, and I'm going to briefly speak to points that I think everyone has already sort of shared. So one thing that I think is very clear to all of us is that if we want to make any substantive changes within higher education, we need to build across differences of job category, campus, type of school, and part of the country that you live in, right? So from the perspective of grad students, a lot of us go into grad school with the hope that when we complete our degrees, we'll be able to find a job that looks something like what our faculty mentors have, where we have job security, living wages, healthcare, that we still get to do our research and teach. But for those of us like myself and Ian that are coming into the very end of our PhDs, what we're finding is that those jobs don't really exist anymore. The market there under the current conditions is saturated, if you will. So in order to start to repair that, a primary goal has to be creating real jobs that come with all of those things, not just for current adjuncts and postdocs that already have PhDs, but also for people like myself and Ian and other adjuncts that will soon have PhDs. Now, the good news about grads is that what we bring with us is a willingness to take decisive collective action and to achieve the goals that we share with our students and with our faculty. So in order to get there, we need everybody on board. Our fellow grads, our tenure track faculty, our non-tenure track adjuncts, postdocs, everybody, in order to collectively improve higher education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. You're the best. And congratulations again on being the first VP of grad workers. It's so exciting. Now I'm going to bring us back to the national stage, and I am going to introduce Tracy Berger. Tracy is a strategic relations and communication staff at UC Boulder. And she's also on the steering committee of United Campus Workers at the University of Colorado. Now, Tracy's already built us, along with Eric, a brand new, beautiful website. So her strategic communications is already coming in handy. But I also think it's really critical to underline the vision of United Campus Workers before Tracy jumps on. And maybe you're doing that, Tracy. But just so folks know, because it's such a powerful vision, UCW has been launching in a bunch of states. Colorado is one of the ones that are most powerful. And it's wall-to-wall organizing in higher ed. So every worker in every job class in one union, right? And that is what we need. That is the way forward in higher ed, is industrial organizing. I'm so inspired by the UCW vision. It's a CWA project, and also been inspired to get to work with Tracy. So Tracy, jump on in. Welcome.
Sure, thank you. I'm super honored to be here and to be allowed to speak to all of you. My reaction when Todd asked me to speak was, wait, why me? Because I don't feel like I'm a person who gets in front of people and speaks a lot. And I think that comes down to, I'm a staff person. I work behind the scenes. I'm not a faculty member who gets up in front of groups and talks frequently. I don't teach frequently. I'm in the support role, and I think it's important that UCW, United Campus Workers as a movement, we're bringing staff and faculty and student workers and temp workers and grad workers and everybody's in one bucket. And I, as somebody who works in a support role that's so behind the scenes, UCW has been the first chance that I've had really to interact with faculty and with students in my current role at the University of Colorado. Most of the time I'm behind the scenes, I'm sending out communications, I'm building communications, I'm working in databases. I'm not on the front line. And I think that the staff perspective is a really important perspective to include, because we normally are hearing from faculty and we're hearing from students, and we're not hearing the important perspective of staff who are also hurting in the current state of higher education. As public funding has gone down for higher education, the real wages of most staff have also either stagnated or fallen. In Colorado, most university and college staff have not had a cost of living raise in years. We have merit raises some years, but they have not happened the last couple of years. And when they do happen, they're below the increase in cost of living and inflation. So our actual wages have fallen. There aren't a lot of promotions. There's not a lot of movement. And that's something that I think we look at and we think, I got into higher education. I got into public higher education. I always said, like, I'm not going to work for a private university. I'm going to work for a public university because I'm passionate about the concept of public education. And we're losing that. The whole concept of public education is becoming privatized, and it's becoming so much more like the private sector. And when I say I want to work in public higher education, there's a reason for that. And I want to feel that passion, and I want to feel like I'm helping students on a daily basis. And I want to feel like my job has importance to the wider community that I live in, and that I'm helping students achieve their goals and all of the reasons that we get into public higher education. And I think along the way, we've lost that. And I wasn't feeling that day to day in my job until I joined the union. And then the union United Campus Workers has really helped me to connect back to, I just saw the great cat comment, she's pretty great. The being in the union has really helped me connect back to that original purpose, that original passion for public higher education, for getting involved, for really trying to make a change in the state. So I also think that staff in particular have an important role, because we often hear about administrative bloat. And that comes from a perspective that when you don't work on the staff side, or you don't interact commonly with the staff side, I think a lot of people end up looking at administration as those top executives who have these huge salaries. But there's the person who administrates your grad program. There's the person who is making sure you get the right communications at the right time, that make sure you register on the right date, and all of those things. There's the administrative or the academic advisor, there's the financial aid advisor, and these are all people who are passionate and whose purpose and the reason that they're in this job is to try to help students succeed. And so trying to kind of battle that administrative, well, not myth, but try to channel it and look at where staff are needed and how they've been impacted by the by cuts to public funding, and how not only we can benefit as staff by being part of this coalition, but also how we can bring our skills. Like, I am a communications professional. I have practical skills in communications and database things that I can bring into this role and help to build it. So I'm happy to be part of this, and I am really glad that you all asked me to join.
Thank you so much, Tracy. That was amazing. You need to speak more. We really have learned and enjoyed listening. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Ileana Nickescu, who is a non-tenure track faculty in women, gender, and sexuality studies. And she is a new member of the Executive Council of Rutgers AAUP. We're so happy to have her. Ileana.
And thank you so much for having me here. I'm very, very honored to be among so many experienced union leaders and union members. And I'm a little bit new to this, but I'm going to talk about this. I kind of volunteered to be here because I wanted the perspective of entities to be here. And this ties into my larger argument about why we need to do this all together. So I teach in women, gender, and sexuality studies, and I often teach not only about gender, but about race as well. And oftentimes, when I talk about gender and race, the issue of white privilege comes up. And then whenever I mention this, someone, usually a white man, says that white privilege does not exist, that he and his father and his grandfather have worked hard for all they have, right? And then now we know that this is only partially true. The GI Bill, in fact, provided returning servicemen with access to education and low interest mortgages. The same was not true for servicemen of color who had served, in fact, in an army that was itself segregated until 1948. White men had to work hard in factory and corporation jobs to pay their mortgages, etc., but they were allowed to do so in a way that made their hard work count. Men of color were not. So there are many ways of defining privilege, and one of them in a racial patriarchal society is that your hard work counts for something. Usually that's white men, but let's imagine that you're a PTL, that you do all sorts of innovative teaching, that your students rave about you in their student evaluations. Will it count? I know of PTLs who have been teaching at Rutgers for 21 years. What if you're an NTT? I know of an NTT who has been teaching at Rutgers for 18 years on 2-year contracts. No job security ever. What if, as an NTT, you happen to publish an article in a top journal? Is it like the proverbial tree in the forest? The neoliberal university that has been created robs us of the benefits of our hard work. We always start at point 0. Nothing accumulates. We're only as good as our last semester. But the neoliberal university robs tenure stream faculty as well of their research time via robo-scheduling, to speak of Rutgers, of their teaching and writing time via administrative work overload, endless reporting that has to be done by an ever-shrinking number of tenured faculty. The point is, we have not created this system. At the Higher Education Labor Summit meeting, the issue was raised, the relationship between the university and the community surrounding it. And some people said it's extractive. Some people mentioned the gentrification and all that. And all that is true, I said, but it's not the professors who came up with those plans, with those ideas. We live in circumstances not of our making. But this is where Higher Education Labor United creates a moment of opportunity. Higher education employs 6 million people and educates so many more. We can build a national movement. And I'm just trying to remember, when did we have a national movement like last time? Was it the women's liberation movement? I'm a scholar of that. It was an amazing movement that transformed society, right? Profoundly, right? For entities and PTLs, the vision platform of the Higher Education Labor United talks about creating a pipeline to tenure track and full-time jobs. It demands the move to supermajority tenure track and full-time teaching. And it demands priority to be given to current instructor and faculties. It recognizes the option of teaching tenure, of service tenure, or research tenure, and it gives priority to contingent instructors and faculty. Now, I came to Rutgers as a PTL in 2014. I've been an NTT since 2018. And 1/3 of full-time faculty at Rutgers are NTTs, right? 1/3 of NTTs are former PTLs. So, but 1/3 of tenure track faculty are not former NTTs and PTLs. So Higher Education Labor United can create that opportunity, a path for jobs, toward job security for all of us. Whether we call it research tenure or teaching tenure or anything we want to, or service tenure, right? It creates a path toward job security. And some people, we can't afford to be discouraged or pessimistic. It's just like with climate change. We need to throw our energy into this fight and write to our representatives, make noise, agitate, educate our students. Our students are going to be partners because we're also working toward canceling student debt. And we can change higher education systemically now. Now, again, I came here to talk from the perspective of an NTT because I felt that it's important to have our perspective here, right? And it is important that entities speak. It is important that PTLs have a voice. And this means that all of us together have a voice in the reconstruction of higher education that is about to happen. And we have to be ready to seize the moment. That's it.
Thank you so much, Ileana. We can build a national movement. I love it. You're right, we can build it, and all of us together is the only way we're going to build it. That's fantastic. And also welcome to the Executive Council. We're so lucky and excited to have your leadership there. Thank you so much. So we have one last speaker, certainly not last, but not least. This is Chris Cox. Chris is a faculty member in sociology and I believe interdisciplinary studies at San Jose State University. He's also an associate vice president of racial and social justice with the California Faculty Association. And just the two quick things about CFA. One is CFA is like a massive, powerful militant union, 30,000 faculty members across California. Two, they lead the way in imagining a union that fights for racial and economic justice. They've just been a beacon for us at Rutgers, AAUP-AFT, and Chris is one of those leaders that has led the way. So it's just fantastic to get to have you here tonight, Chris. Welcome, and we're excited to hear from you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here with you all. I am Chris Cox, as introduced. I'm really excited to be here. I want to give my sympathies to those who are affected by the flooding that you're having in the East. I wish we could bring some of that water because where I am in the West, we are basically, our whole state is on fire. And unfortunately, our air quality is very horrible. So, some bad things going on all the way around. I kind of like to start with that, though, because I think it's really important for us to recognize that, we have multiple crises that kind of converge on us. And we can't really wait. I don't think we can collectively afford to wait any longer for us to really seek the kind of justice in our working conditions and learning conditions that we really need nationwide. CFA has been able to do a lot of work, especially with regard to some of our racial justice work. Part of the reason that that's possible, though, is that we are in a state that has collective bargaining rights. And we actually have the rights to do much of the work that we do. And if we were in another state, another place, we wouldn't have the same ability. One of the reasons why I really like what higher ed, this organization, this group, right, Higher Ed Labor United is working together on national legislation, because I really think that there have to be some things that are done comprehensively at the federal level instead of having constant small fights or smaller fights at state and local levels. Higher ed in our state, for example, we have 3 major systems with very different conditions. We have the UC system, right, which has a lot of our graduate programs. They run some of the hospitals that are attached to universities. We are the big system in a certain way because we are the 23 campuses of the CSU, and we represent, about 30,000 faculty, Unit 3 faculty. That includes our tenure line faculty, our non-tenure line faculty, counselors, coaches, and librarians in our unit. So we are unified in that way. Myself, I am the term we use in our system is lecturer. I am a lecturer that's been teaching in the CSU system for 21 years. And I just have to say that some of the things that we are putting into the platform for Higher Ed Labor United are some of the kinds of demands that make our ability to continue in this field possible. I mean, there are some working conditions that exist out there for which I wouldn't be able to engage in the profession that I love, which is being an educator, if it weren't for certain kinds of workplace, safety nets that we can actually rely upon. And in the CSU, we're going into we're basically in bargaining right now, and we are fighting for improved conditions, because even though we have some conditions that people from other places look at as being beneficial, we're in a constant fight, A, to push forward, to continue to improve, and B, to not lose and to not fall behind. And some of the things that I think are really important for us to address are the ways in which different folks in the university environment are impacted by these larger neoliberal policies. We're not all impacted in the same way, but we have to have a way to come together to advocate for one another. And so this is why one of the things for us in CFA is really important, is that we have a wall-to-wall unit in terms of our tenure line faculty and non-tenure line faculty being in the same bargaining unit, right? And so as a non-tenure line faculty member, I'm on the front line fighting for the important causes and conditions in our contract, for example, for our tenure line colleagues. And I also have tenure line colleagues who stand with us as non-tenure line faculty to do the same. And that's the only way we've been able to really move forward and win. I want to point out a couple of things, though. One of the things I like about Higher Ed Labor United is the fact that there's a recognition of the interrelation of so many different dynamics, right? Many of the graduate student workers that I've talked to that are participating in Higher Ed Labor United are very aware of the fact that some of them are future non-tenure track faculty. And so the conditions of non-tenure track faculty are important for everyone, because, you're looking at a job market, right? An overall labor market in higher ed for which there just aren't the tenure line positions out there at the moment. We also have to have a recognition that, especially, this past year and a half has been very difficult during the time of COVID, but we can't forget some of the racial justice reckoning that we've come up against as a society as well, right? This is the time when CFA decided to make some racial justice demands. And part of those demands, though, include a recognition of the differential impacts of things like increases in fees on students of different backgrounds, students of color, poor students, our Indigenous, Native American students who are impacted in very unique ways, right? We have African American students, especially in particular communities that are heavily impacted, right? And so we want to make sure that our universities maintain space, not just for people of color, Indigenous people to be present, but for us also to have a voice in governance and a voice in what actually happens. One of the common sayings that we have in CFA is that student learning conditions are our faculty working conditions. And one of the other things we need to remember, every time we're in class and we look out at our students, we're also looking at our future, right? Our future colleagues are in front of us every day. And so part of what we have to fight for is making sure that our future colleagues that are our current students also have not only justice in their education, but just paths forward, right? As they move forward. We don't want to see people discouraged from going on and pursuing their own talents and their own skills in the fields that they study, simply because they cannot afford graduate school, cannot afford student debt, right? And can't live a decent life. And I'm going to bet that every person on this call and every person within earshot who works in higher ed probably knows someone with a PhD, $100,000 in debt, no permanent job, possibly no medical benefits. One of the things that doesn't get talked about is the number of faculty, largely adjunct faculty and non-tenure track, but I'm certain that there are probably some tenure line faculty out there too in this situation, and that is faculty who are homeless. I live in the Silicon Valley, an incredibly expensive place. And I had a colleague on the news about a year and a half ago or so who admitted on the news that, she lives in her car and teaches, right? And so these are kinds of outcomes that there is absolutely no reason that anyone who's teaching in this country should have to live in a car. And so we need to make sure that when we're starting to think about proposing legislation, making a push at the federal level, that we're inclusive in that push. And we remember that there are folks among us who have vastly different conditions, vastly different living conditions, but the only way to achieve justice is to consider everybody's position. And I think that what Higher Ed Labor United has put together so far in terms of the vision and the platform does a really good job of being inclusive. It's very difficult to do that when you're talking about higher ed workers across the nation, but I think there's something in this a little bit for everyone, right? One of the speakers before talked a little bit about some of the kinds of conditions, things like what we as faculty, particularly as non-tenure track faculty do, that administrators know they can rely on, right? Which is that we always want to do the best job we can. Many of us are very student-centered, and so they know we're going to spend hours after work, quote unquote, off the clock to do good work, right? To be professional as educators and as researchers, et cetera. And one of the ways this gets exploited for a lot of people of color and Native folks is that we wind up with this dynamic of cultural taxation. And it's the unspoken expectation that anytime there's something going on with students of color, right, that it is our job, that we've got to step up. I can't tell you how many times I have literally been called and said, you know what, there's an issue in the Black community. We need you to step up. We need your voice. We need you to volunteer, right? And all those things, on the one hand, it's nice, but on the other hand, it's labor for which no one wants to pay me, right? And those are the things that when we go up for whatever kind of, maybe promotion or merit pay or whatever kind of increase you can get, those are the things that all of a sudden you find out when it's written down in your dossier or your file or whatever, it doesn't count. We engage in lots of labor that doesn't count. It doesn't get you any closer to that tenure line job. It doesn't get you any closer to that promotion or anything like that. And so ultimately what we see as part of this larger neoliberal dynamic in higher education is that there are inequalities that continue to be foisted upon people, right? And the university expects to be able to have wonderful news stories that come out in local publications and the nightly news talking about great work done at your university, but it's done through an expectation of you basically being willing to exploit yourself, right? These are conditions that we really have to change. And especially for those of us in states where we have collective bargaining rights or better conditions, I think these are the times when we really need to be able to make a lot of noise so that we can create a national movement, right? That actually helps everyone to have a voice, not one group speaking for another or one group dominating another, but actually brings everyone into the fold and helps to give us a greater voice. And the last thing I want to say is just, I hope we all have some strength to work together and move forward, but also a little bit of patience, because I don't think that it's realistic to think we're going to get one bill, one piece of legislation, one push at one time, and then everybody's going to be made whole, right? This has to be the formation of a movement that continues through time to address the concerns, the needs of faculty, staff, students, people who work in universities at all capacities, right? So that way we can really see for the 21st century as it continues, a higher education system that is sustainable, right? That's effective and that treats people with the dignity that we all deserve. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Chris, for your amazing remarks. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers, both local and national. If we could all give them a Zoom hand. Amazing. It's amazing to hear all these voices from all over the country, all the different job categories, and to think about this shared project of Higher Education Labor United. It is now time for question and answer or just comment, really a chance for us all to discuss some of the things that have been said. I ask that you put your name in the stack and raise your hand. You can either just do it the old fashioned way. Ideal is the digital hand. Okay. I think the first person on stack was James Robinson. James?
Hi, my name is James Robinson. I'm an adjunct here at Rutgers. I'm also on the executive board of our union here. And my question is for everybody on the board. So this bill, this seizing the moment that we're faced with, what does this organizing look like on the ground? How can we achieve, pie in the sky, all these things, but at least some of these things? So, what are not only the alliances that we need to forge, but what are the things we need to be doing as far as organizing on the ground to win these things? So yeah, this is for anybody on the board or panel.
I can jump in and then hopefully others can add. And we've been thinking about this a lot, James. So it's a really good question. I mean, it depends on what level, right? So we're dealing with right in front of us a very short term, as Ian laid out really beautifully, a short-term horizon with the budget reconciliation. We're trying to win some small things there. It's a hard timeline in relationship to university life because much of it was done over the summer. It's really hard to move faculty, grad workers, postdoc staff over the summer, right? And so we're in a way behind the eight ball, but we have aligned ourselves as again, Ian and Trent have detailed, as some 450,000 higher ed workers across 70 unions. We're having meetings with legislators, and we're trying to now that our campuses are getting online, and this is the first step, this event in particular, to get membership educated about this particular issue, because much of it happened over the summer. And we now got to get our folks, Rutgers, our members, we're a strong union, but our members don't know much about this because people have been away, and that makes sense. So political education is the first step. And then I think what we're going to need to do is a mixture of collective action. And we have a collective action committee working on a plan there, and legislative work. And in New Jersey, we had a meeting with Senator Booker's chief of staff, and they already said they agree with our demands and are going to work with us. Bryan Sachs was fantastic in that meeting. So I think there's a mixture of direct action that we need to pull together and legislative work. But then again, that's their timeline, their budget reconciliation. What we really will need is to get past that. And as Chris said, we need to build a campaign on our own terms and understand that we're not going to get everything done at one moment, but at this moment, we're operating in relationship to the feds and the Senate process. We need to move on our own process, building our own campaign once budget reconciliation is over. And that will look like building on our campuses, direct action, days of action at the national level, or weeks of action that can make demands that also lead to lobbying efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think our next question is from Jason Wozniak, who is an amazing organizer with the Debt Collective and fellow faculty member at Westchester.
Thanks, Donna, and thanks everyone. Chris, so good to see you. It's been a long time. So I think this would fall under more the long-term organizing question, and I think it's related to Illeana. Am I saying your name correctly? If I'm not, I'm sorry. Something that you briefly brought up. On the one hand, there's the need to organize on our campuses across various sectors, right? But I'm also very interested and somewhat concerned about how we build power and support outside the campus through the community. In other words, like how, and maybe this has come up already, but how are we going to make sure that we have this support, the communities around us, whether that be at the state level or local level, so on and so forth, supporting whatever it is we do. And I think that's particularly challenging because sadly, we live in a political economy where neoliberal ideology is so strong. So like we often have to make these arguments that appeal to this market logic that a lot of folks here were speaking against. And so I think it's a really tricky situation that we're in about how to build power with a public that wants, in some regards, neoliberal universities to integrate into the market economy, blah, 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 right? Everyone knows the story. So just really quickly, one thing that I was thinking about as I was thinking about this question was like, what would it look like to build power with some of the K through 12 teacher unions? Because the K through 12 teacher unions are deeply concerned about their students going to colleges where they're going to go into debt, get poor education, so on and so forth. And I'm just curious about like if there's been talk amongst the group about like how to build these organizations outside the university as well, and just suggesting perhaps that like K-12 teacher unions might be one way to begin that process. So thanks for everyone for the great talks.
Thank you, Jason. I wonder, maybe we could take 2 questions because we have Marisa on chat stack, and then open it up to the panel to respond to Jason's fantastic question about the alliance between community and the alliance between K-12 unions. But Marisa, do you want to jump in? Marisa's also been a critical organizer, both with HELU and with Scholars for a New Deal for Higher Ed. Jump on in, Marisa, and then we'll let the panel answer both Jason's question or Marisa's comment question.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate it. I just wanted to mention a piece that sort of hasn't come out yet, which is the New Deal for Higher Ed. I don't know if folks have heard of that concept. I know Rutgers Freedom School did a New Deal for Higher Ed event, but y'all should know that Jen Middlestat, a history professor at Rutgers, sort of had the seeds that planted the seeds of this, and this group, Scholars for New Deal for Higher Ed, which is not a membership. We're not doing grassroots organizing. That's being done through HELU and unions and other things. But Scholars is really working to kind of change the public conversation and do some agenda setting, writing white papers. And I think one of the real accomplishments that Scholars has done is to convince the national AAUP and AFT to launch this New Deal for Higher Ed campaign. So I just wanted to flag that and have folks, pay attention to that. And I know that AAUP is doing some New Deal for Higher Ed National Days of Action that we're trying to coordinate with. And also just say that, one of the mid-range goals, and Ian and Donna and Colena are all on the board of Scholars as well. The reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, which is likely coming next year, is one of those intermediate goals, right, that I think we all need to have on our minds working forward. So I just wanted to flag that. Thanks.
Thank you, Marisa. So let's open it to the panel to respond to both Marisa's discussion of New Deal for Higher Ed and Scholars, and also Jason's really important question about the relationship to community and also the relationship to K-12 unions. So any of the panelists want to jump in and respond? You could just put your name, you could just open up and speak, or put your name in stack and jump in.
I can just speak briefly to this idea of integrating community and other areas of education, just in the sense that when that was brought up, I just keep thinking about like the bargaining for the common good framework and how powerful it's been in Connecticut. Over the past year, we've managed to sort of assemble a coalition of unions and orgs and faith groups, all segments of society beginning to kind of really understand how all the different pieces fit together for that broader goal. So, I don't know how many of you are, some of you have talked about going into bargaining soon and so on. It really is sort of a powerful model to use, and, highly recommend it for drawing those in.
Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Chris. I'll jump in if I can on that. I think there is a variety of ways to start to think about that, but to my mind, sometimes it's good to think a little bit smaller. So, for example, in California, we have in different areas, local labor councils, and for the areas where we have a CSU, we generally try to have a relationship with the labor council. And I think it's important for a couple reasons. One of them is because when you are fighting that neoliberal kind of mindset and ideology, I think you have to start off with other folks who might be inclined to see the situation similarly to yourselves. And so some of our fellow laborers in labor councils are a great place to start with that. I know in our state and in our system, we've had times where we have, different groups have alliances between some of the K-12 unions and organizing groups in their local area, as well as, campus community. And sometimes it's around a very specific thing. And it does very much relate to the principles of bargaining for common good, where you might have community groups that are interested in a community problem or community issue. And you use that as a space where you start to develop some relationships so that you can actually have some talking points as well. Because I think one of the things is that if we always let only our opposition talk to members of communities, that's the only perspective they're ever going to hear. That's the only voice they're going to hear. So they're not going to see things in a different light. So sometimes it starts, to me, as simple as just basic conversation with others so that we can have, opportunities to develop counter narratives that make sense to people in their own context. Because otherwise, you think about it, most people think, right, they just assume college professors are well paid. That's what it is to be a college professor. We all sit around with those jackets with the elbow patches, right? And that's just not the reality. And so the very first thing we have to do sometimes is bust that myth, right? The myth that people have of what our profession is and what our working conditions are like and what our living conditions are like. But when people start to see that much of what we face is very similar to what workers in other sectors face, then we're not so far away, we're not so distant, and we're not so elite and so privileged, right? I hate to say this following part, but one of the things that we also have to do too is we have to deal with some of our colleagues who revel in that public perception that we are higher than, above. We are all wearing the elbow patches and this and that, because there are some of our colleagues who don't want to describe themselves as a worker. There are some of our colleagues who want to see themselves as a kind of a separate category of person in society. And that doesn't really serve us very well anymore. So part of it is internal organizing. I think that's important for that as well. Thanks.
Illeana, did you have your hand up? You're muted.
Sorry about that. So I just wanted to say briefly, and as somebody who is, again, kind of new to this, but how about our students? Our students are members of the communities around us. Our students are basically, we're educating them, but we're empowering them. We're teaching them, to be critical thinkers, and then Higher Education Labor United talks also about abolition of student debt, the cancellation of student debt. We're talking about free education. I don't see why we shouldn't perhaps build alliances with student groups on campus. Our students are fantastic. They're very articulate. I teach women and gender studies students, they're very, out there, organizers. Yes, exactly. Alumni. Yes, even better. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So just my 2 cents. Thank you.
If I could just respond to that quickly, I agree 100% that we need even more organizing with students and also with their families. That's crucial for building this broad coalition. I will say at Rutgers, there has been a long history of organizing students. In fact, it was with the election of Trump and the pushback against it. The union has an organization called Rutgers One, and it goes all the way back to the early 2000s. And one of the things that really built union power was organizing with our student body that's largely huge numbers of immigrant students who were profoundly affected by Trump's election. I think we had a march with 3,000 people protesting the language being used against the undocumented and fighting for the rights of immigrant students. So I think that there is already a base, but it is a heavy lift. And that's something about thinking about organizing within union coalitions. We have all the infrastructure that the unions provide. Organizing students and their families on a large scale requires a lot of capacity, but it's something that we have precedents for, but I think we do, as Illeana said, need even more organizing. We have Paul O'Keefe in Stack.
And maybe we make it the last question so we can move to
Okay, sorry if that's quick. I just had thoughts about how we could move beyond to other states, other places which have shit labor rights, like people who are doing, 80% of the classes are unmasked. I was meant to teach this afternoon. They finally canceled 2 hours after the football, postponed. But I'm confident 199 of my 200 students would have worn masks. I teach the same classes as lots of people across this country for probably double the pay on a regular contract, a good union contract. How do you move beyond places that already have unions is where I'm just wondering if people could speak to.
I think Trent, get in there. This is what Trent's thinking about 24/7. So I want to give Trent a little space, but Trent, be brief because we want to do 2 more things before we close.
Yeah. A brief to clarify, Paul, did you mean places that already do have strong unions or places where collective bargaining is not allowed?
places like West Virginia and Louisiana, where I've worked and lived and been frustrated mightily.
Yeah, for sure. So brief intro, I'm Troy McDonald, he, him English PhD candidate at Washington University in St. Louis, organized with the WashU Undergrad and Grad Workers Union, or WUGWU. And grads, historically, we do not have easy pathways to collective bargaining, but we've been fighting for 50 years and winning for 50 years to establish collective bargaining. However, the Deep South, LOC, and now the Midwest, Wisconsin, Iowa being the primary examples of states that have been attacking collective bargaining rights. We don't win if we only focus on the workplace. We don't win if we only focus on the occupation. We have to be thinking bigger, bolder, and the federal government as the one joint funder of all of our institutions. That if we leverage our collective power and either disrupt or credibly threaten to disrupt capital flow, that's how workers get what they want. In this case, by attaching pathways to collective bargaining to the federal funding of higher education. That's how we can knock the blocks out of the bans on public sector collective bargaining across the South and Midwest.
Awesome. Thank you, Trent. So Tracy, get one last word, and then I'm going to pass it to Ian. But Tracy, jump in real quick.
Sure. So I think, so Colorado is a right to work state, and I think most of the United Campus Workers chapters are actually in right to work states across the South and Southwest. And we see it as our power does not come from a collective bargaining agreement. Our power comes from our importance as workers to the institution and to the community. And if we all come together, then we're a union and we can make things happen. And we have been making things happen, even though we technically have no right to collectively bargain. So I think the United Campus Workers model is maybe a good one to look into for people who are in right to work states, because we're working hard to make a functional, a way to be a functional and powerful union in those states.
And UCW's, the United Campus Workers are growing in the South in specific, right, Tracy? So it is focused on that.
Yeah.
Go. Sorry. And so one last thing, and then I'm going to kick it to Ian. Just, I think, Jason, your provocation about the relationship between higher ed and K-12 is a really critical one for us to think about. Just the way Colena has flagged that we can't let them separate 2-year and 4-year institutions and divide us, or the way they want to divide us between full-time and not full-time faculty, or faculty and grads, or faculty and staff, or grads and staff. We can't let them divide us across higher ed versus K-12. So building an alliance with those K-12 unions, particularly the ones that are inspirations, whether it's CTU or UTLA or many others, seems like a really critical step. But we need to close this down. Before we do, I'm going to pass it to Ian. Ian's going to talk to us about next steps and how we move the ball forward. So Ian, take it away.
Thank you, Todd. And thank you, everyone. I love that the questions were about how we go from talking to action and what it looks like to actually organize. And there are many great questions about partnering beyond the sector and working in less hospitable states than New Jersey. And all those great questions. And at the same time, all organizing starts by talking to your colleagues and by talking to members of your community. And so before we let everyone log off, what I want to ask everyone to do is take the first step, open up the link that I just put in the chat, our pledge. And while you're doing that, while you're filling out the pledge, start thinking about the 10 people you're going to share this with and get to work. So we're all going to take that action together right now, and let us know in the chat once you've done it, and let us know that you're excited. Let us know what you're thinking about. But we're building the tools. We're building a plane as it takes off, but we do have the tools, and it's in our power. And so let's do it. So yeah, please check out that link. Take the first organizing step to talk to your colleagues, to share this YouTube video with them, with people in your networks. And yeah, let's start building out this list and building out this movement. And thank you all for being here. So I don't know if it's on me to end it.
I think Donna's taking us home.
Great, Donna.
I was just busy filling out my pledge. So I'll just say a few words before we close out. Again, I really want to thank all of our speakers. It's just been amazing. And I feel as if we've gotten this multi-sided vision of what the university could be, versus what the university is. And, you know, thinking of the catastrophic weather events that have been happening, I feel like we're at a time where things are so urgent that they are also very visible. And as painful as that is, it also creates a real sense of possibility and collective mobilization. To emphasize a point that Todd made, I think it's so important to insert a labor vision of higher education. One of the big reasons that I think we're having problems getting the public, the voting public, to support funding higher education is the vision of higher education as this elite realm modeled on Brown University in the case of the chair, which, you know, the ivory tower. But in reality, the majority of people who attend college attend public universities. The majority of people who attend public universities live at home. And of course, of the largest segment is the segment that Colena was speaking to, which is community colleges. So I think this higher ed labor coalition is so important in creating the connections between workers across the country, but also providing an alternate vision, reminding us that these are institutions that are central to the local economy. These are places where all different job categories of workers work. The public sector is 5 times as unionized as the private workplace. So these are major sites of power, and we need to think about them that way, and to fight the idea of elite meritocracy when a tiny number of tenure track faculty at the most elite private schools, many of whom have between 15 and 20% of their students classified as what Occupy Wall Street called the 1%. So I think that this labor vision is pragmatic, but it also has a very important ideological, or how do I put this? It has an important piece for making the university legible in a different way. So I want to thank everyone. We all learned so much tonight, and our speakers, both from Rutgers and all over the country. You were wonderful. And for many of us, think about who those 10 people are. That's what I'll be doing in the next 10 minutes or so. And I think we can close it out. Thank you all for coming. And please do subscribe to the Rutgers Freedom YouTube channel, so that when we do have Freedom Schools, you'll get a notification. Thank you all.